Hello, everyone, and welcome to Demanufacturing Consent on BowlingFrogsPost.com. I am your host, Guillermo Jimenez. Thank you all so much for tuning in once again and downloading today's podcast. And as always, a big thanks to those of you who make this show possible by subscribing to BFP. Could not be done without you, so again, very, very much appreciate the support. Be sure and join us here every week on Demanufacturing Consent on Bowling Frogs Post. If you've missed any of our previous episodes, reminder that you can catch the archives of this show on BowlingFrogsPost.com and on my site as well, tracesofreality.com. Subscribe to TOR via iTunes, RSS feed, all that good stuff. It's free. Check us out on Facebook and Twitter, /Traces of Reality on both of those sites. Okay, now on today's show, my guest today is Vivian Lesnick-Wiseman. She's a journalist and documentary filmmaker. Her upcoming film is now titled The Hacker Wars, and if you've been following the project, you know that it was called The Reality Wars up until a short time ago, so we'll talk a little bit about that. The film raises some pressing issues about the government's crackdown on hacktivists, on activists, journalists. Vivian, thank you so much for being on the program. How are you doing today?
Thank you, Guillermo. How are you?
I'm doing just fine. It's really good to talk to you. As I mentioned, you have this new film that you're currently working on and that I'd like to talk about. But I would like to spend a few minutes just getting to know you a little bit and talk about you, talk about maybe even some of your previous films and your background as a journalist. So if you wouldn't mind sharing just a little bit about yourself, how you got started in journalism and how you got started with filmmaking.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Well, I actually went to law school before I went to film school. And my father is a legendary journalist. So I really grew up around journalism. He was a Cuban revolutionary, and he left Cuba after the revolution because he didn't want to have a revolution aligned with Moscow. He wanted a non-aligned revolution, not U.S. or Moscow influenced. So when he went to Miami, he started first a radio show and later a magazine out of the basement of our house. So I grew up around journalism. It was actually a really successful journalism venture, and he spoke very openly about wanting relations with Cuba. And because of that stance that he took against U.S. policy, he became the focal point of the anti-Castro terrorists in the United States. So his magazine was bombed 11 times by CIA-trained anti-Cuba, anti-Castro, U.S. living in the U.S. Terrorists. So I really understand, advocacy journalism and people who speak truth to power. And so that's why I became interested in the hacktivists and the work of WikiLeaks, Assange, Barrett Brown, and of course, Jeremy Hammond and his very principled stand for transparency and advocacy. So it's kind of like we keep making the same movie over and over again, keep writing, right? It's like kind of like, yeah. So journalism, it's in my genes. I didn't study journalism. I went to first law school and later to film school, but it just kind of, it's something that I do instinctively, try to expose things that other people aren't looking into.
No, and as you mentioned, that's very interesting to find out that this is in your blood, in your genes. And your father is, of course, Max Lesnick, for those of you following along at home, in case you missed that. And as you mentioned, a Cuban revolutionary, at one time a close friend of Fidel Castro, and had a falling out, as you mentioned, as you described. And so this was the basis, I think, in reading about you, I found this out, this was the basis of your film, The Man of Two Havanas. And you were talking about the environment in the 1970s and 80s, Miami, And as you talked about, the CIA's involvement with the training of terrorists, these anti-Castro Cubans, all very, very fascinating stuff that, honestly, I need a deeper education on this part of our history. I don't know enough about it, and I do plan on checking out your film to learn more about this. And I'm glad... Yeah, and then so, I'm very interested in hearing about this because, as you mentioned, that's really cool to hear that your father went at this independently, in the basement of your house. I mean, I am so down with that. Doing this on your own. This is the way that I've chosen to do this. I'm not sponsored by anybody. I rely on our readers and our listeners to help us out and to keep it going. And so far, so good. So I'm so down with that. That's really cool. So yeah, let's get into this then. So you talk about how I also find it interesting that as you said, you did not go to school for journalism. Neither did I, and I consider myself a journalist. And so many of us these days who are involved with independent media and independent journalism just decided to do it on our own and just have a go at it because we saw the world around us, whatever it might be, whatever given issue is your thing. And we said, you know what, something needs to be done about this. Why not, enter the fray and do this myself and have a say in it, and therefore, get the message out to the people. I think that's excellent. So you've come at these new issues with hacktivism, activism, and journalism. You mentioned two important names already, Barrett Brown and Jeremy Hammond. Which I'm sure your film will go into. So could you talk about, this new film? And so people that have been following it, again, as I mentioned at the beginning of the program, it was called The Reality Wars. And you mentioned to me just now briefly before we started recording here that the name has changed to The Hacker Wars. So can you go into that? Just explain, first of all, why the name changed, and then explain what the film is about.
Yes, certainly. Well, the original name, the movie hasn't changed at all. We're editing, and then we thought, yes, this is about the reality wars. We're just looking at it from different angles. So the name, The Reality Wars, I think has to do with the names of both of your shows, Traces of Reality, and also your rift on manufacturing consent. Mm-hmm. So The Reality Wars is the war on our minds by the government, the mainstream media, by those who want to shape how we see the world. And the hackers and the hacktivists, they put a wrench in that because when they expose secrets, they expose caches of emails, or they expose client lists of private intelligence contractors and the corruption and dirty work and the collusion between government, private intelligence contractors, and corporations. They are breaking or pulling back the curtain and exposing what's behind this false reality that we take for truth. That we think that this is the way the world is, but really these forces, mainstream media, etc., what they're doing is it's a psyops on our minds. It's not giving forth information, but it's confusing false information for reality. So that's the original name, which I think is what also I see as what you're doing with your two shows, trying to get at like what's behind what the other forces want us to think is the truth. And I know it completely sounds like science fiction, The Matrix, but once you start looking at like what we're supposed to believe is true, and then we see the reality in revelations, like in the Snowden revelations, on the massive spying, in the Stratford hack, on the spying on activists such as Occupy activists, and the Bhopal disaster, which I'd actually like to get into at least one of those revelations of the Stratford hack. But once you start seeing this, then it no longer sounds like some science fiction movie that you and I are cooking up, right?
Right.
So the change to the Hacker Wars is just a spin in the perspective, rather than looking at it from the point of view of what's being done to us, the American people. in manufacturing realities for us. I'm looking at it from, sorry about that.
It's okay.
I'm looking at it from the point of view of what the hackers are doing to fight back and what we can do to fight back. So that's why it's called the hacker wars.
Gotcha.
Because it's less of a passive, we're the victims and this is done upon us, and more we're the warriors, the information warriors, the hacktivists, the people that can actually change things. And so it's the same movie, it's just that the perspective has shifted.
Gotcha. No, that makes a whole lot of sense, and absolutely, I can very much relate to what you're talking about. Indeed, that is basically what I was going for with the name Traces of Reality, and also, as you mentioned, with demanufacturing consent, is just that, exactly the way you described it, is challenging the sort of prescribed reality coming at us, the sort of narratives that are shaped for us, the parameters of debate are shaped for us by, you know, the either the government, the state, intelligence, big business, corporations, and they're all in league to create this environment where a certain a reality that they prefer us to subscribe to is projected upon the public. And it sounds, I know, like, as he just mentioned, like something out of the Matrix or something, which functions as an allegory for what is actually happening in reality. So that's why I guess that film resonated so much with the public, and why a film like V for Vendetta has resonated so much with the public, and why that image of Guy Fawkes has been adopted by Occupy and by Anonymous. There's a reason for that. And so absolutely, I completely concur with your analysis of this sort of psyop happening, generally through media, through the information, through the misinformation and disinformation and all that stuff. So very, very interesting to hear you talk about this. And also, I find it interesting that you found that to be, at least with your film, and that perspective to be a sort of a victim mentality, because it's something that I've talked about a lot on the program. That's something that I actively try to combat, because I understand that by talking about so much bad news and talking about how we're being surveilled and talking about how our phones are being tapped and all that stuff, you can go down the laundry list of the NDAA, for crying out loud, and so many different things that can become a little overwhelming, and the listener, the sort of consumer of this information, can come to feel hopeless and helpless, and oh my God, it's all gone to hell, and what am I going to do about it? Nothing. And you can develop, right? You can develop this sort of victim mentality and this passivity to our relationship with what's happening all around us. We become observers instead of active participants. And so I actively try and to speak that message and say, do not feel that way. I really hope that in doing this show, I am not, providing or helping for that sort of mentality to further develop. I really dislike that, and so I hope that so I feel that by taking a different perspective with this film, perhaps that is a very, very good idea. Not perhaps, I think it's a good idea, and perhaps it will have a better effect, and it will be received in a different way. To look at the ways that we can affect the system, the way we can challenge it and create change. And I do feel that hacktivism definitely has its place in this. It is, after all, the new front in this, I don't know what you want to call it, but I know what Keith Alexander and Michael Hayden would call it. They're calling this, cyber war is the next front, and they're saying Anonymous is the next Al-Qaeda, and hacktivists should be treated like terrorists, and all this nonsense. And they're really sort of painting this picture, I think, and setting it up so that they can blame potentially some kind of event, say a power grid goes down or something. So, wars are begun on false pretenses all the time, and that really worries me that they can, in a way, in the future, try to pin this on hacktivism and hacktivists, and so we've seen this already so much. Go ahead.
They're setting the stage for that, and I mean, most wars, or recent wars anyway, are based on false flags. I mean, it's kind of the culmination of these reality wars, if you will. I I'm happy to hear that you agree with the shift in the name, which is the shift in perspective. Part of it was watching the film as we're editing, but another part of it is as I talk to people, like people like in my family, even they feel like, okay, so this is true, and now what?
Right, right.
So with the spying and all that, so and that they can't change anything. And so the point of view of the movie is like you may not be able to change anything, but if you don't try to change things, you're a slave. I mean, the
Mm.
whole idea of resistance is an end in itself. Um, and I think that the hacktivists and activists um, are really, well, the hackers are the last front. I mean, I really, in the film, I think that these are the people that are at the forefront that are not deterred. They're not afraid. And the people that I cover in the film, which is kind of like our heroes, they're anti-heroes, like Hammond and Brown. And Weave also, in his own way, Weave, the hacker that didn't hack AT&T, the infamous internet troll. He's part of the
Right.
film
Yeah.
as well. He basically the whole. Well, I'll just cover Weave quickly. Basically, the whole tech community is in agreement, including the Electronic Frontier Foundation, Stanford University, Mozilla, Firefox, that he is imprisoned for a non-crime. He basically data mined. He aggregated one. He created a program, and then he spit out email addresses, and he gave them to a journalist. So sure was he that he wasn't breaking any laws, that he took credit for it and gave it to a journalist at Gawker to publish. And Weave is doing 4 years in jail because he had the audacity to embarrass a multinational corporation, AT&T.
Amazing.
He's probably going to overturn the CFAA. Not that that's going to fix anything, because we live in right now in a country that can just create other laws. You know, if we've overturned the CFAA is the hacking law. There is no other hacking law. So if the day they overturn the CFAA, you can hack everything because there is no right.
Yeah.
So, but governments that like the United States that are in decline and feel insecure because of the economic crisis, because of impending maybe environmental disasters, they just create laws. I mean, like the one you mentioned, like the NDAA and the indefinite detention clause. Those are, I mean, nothing that governments, like, to use a really like the over the top example, the Nazi Germany, nothing they did was illegal. They had laws in place
Right.
to justify everything being done, and we're making laws that are completely a shift away, a sea change from the types of laws that we had even 10 years ago, and clearly after 9/11.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like I'm talking about too many subjects at
No,
once.
not at all. Because all of these subjects relate, and they're all very important. And I do want to get into. You mentioned one specific example that I was going to ask you, and that was Weave. But there are. I do want to get into the details of the Hammond case. We've
Yes.
talked about Barrett Brown on the show previously, but it's
Oh,
worth
okay.
mentioning because it does relate. Before we go into that specifically, though, I just have one last quick question about
Yes.
a general question, because this is still on my mind. So I was recording a podcast yesterday with a couple friends of mine, Tom Secker and James Corbett, who people listening to the show know well. So I thought I'd mention that. But we did talk about Anonymous a little bit, and it came up, so it's still on my mind. I want to ask you this because I know people who are listening to this who are more discerning listeners, who are perhaps a touch more cynical than perhaps I am. They do look at something like Anonymous, and they think, well, wait, what if Anonymous is in itself a PSYOP? What if this is in itself a controlled opposition, right? Those questions have been raised. So I'd like to get your opinion on that, because the way I see it, and the way I think that this is sort of disproven, is that Anonymous isn't anything that can be identifiable. It's an amorphous group. These are individuals who sort of do their own thing and identify under the common banner of Anonymous, but they are an amorphous group. And I think that by examining these individual cases, like a Jeremy Hammond, for example, then we can come to learn how there are individuals who, at one time or another, I guess, considered themselves to be a part of this amorphous group Anonymous, who are doing genuine work in trying to show what is actually happening behind the scenes. So, your opinion on that, Vivian? Just
sure.
Yeah.
Well, is the reasoning that Anonymous could be government created to what end?
Right.
In order to I don't actually know what the answer is. To what end? In order to close down the internet? I mean, what are the different
Potentially, I suppose that I guess that could be one possible theory as to why that could be done. As you mentioned earlier, possibly to because we know, for example, obviously something like this can be infiltrated. That's I think is a given. We learned that through COINTELPRO. Right.
Sure.
So I mean that's a certainty. But I suppose that there are people who think that it was from start to finish some kind of government op for whatever end. I mean, what's your general take on that?
Well, I'm assuming they don't mean it was a government op all the way from B-Chan, or like when does it become a government op? Right?
Right. No, I see what you're saying. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. Can it be infiltrated? Can it be used? Jeremy Hammond attested to that in his closing statement when he was sentenced. I mean, I don't want to start at the end, but just quickly, he asked, when Jeremy Hammond took his very principled stand and he faced Judge Preska, who was about to sentence him, and had the ability to sentence him to time served, meaning he could go home, and up to 10 years, he took that opportunity to do something which would have guaranteed him the top of the guidelines, and he did indeed get full 10 years, which is that he did not show any, he did not, he took he took the position that what he'd done was right.
No remorse, in other words, right?
No remorse, and even I would say that he would do it again.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
scissatism as well. I mean, I was there, and everyone that was there was inspired by what he said. But getting back to what you just mentioned as to whether Anonymous is a PSYOP, he said that the informant that we all, your listeners may or may probably know, but I'm not sure exactly what your universe is. Sabu, who was an elite hacker and created Anti-Sec, that's an offshoot of Anonymous, which was a honeypot for hackers, and that is the way Hammond was entrapped, was through this, government created crime. Jeremy Hammond at sentencing said that he was taking responsibility for his actions, and it was time that the government took responsibility for their actions, because he had been asked through Sabu, and every time we say Sabu, Hector Monsegur, we can use the word the government or the FBI or the state, but the U.S. government used Anonymous, used Jeremy Hammond to hack into secure foreign government websites, and he listed them. He started trying to list them, Brazil, Iran, and then he was stopped, and there's a protective order not allowing him to list the governments that he personally had invaded. at the government's bequest. So clearly the government is doing
Yeah.
something.
Yeah.
Why would they use hackers and not government hackers to break into these websites, knowing that someone like Hammond could reveal it later? I mean, that's a good question. I don't know the answer. It's certainly not because it's cheaper to use rogue hackers that you're going to arrest
Sure.
out
Yeah.
that. Um, uh, Jeremy says
Yeah.
because they're better. They're kind of, I mean, there must be some that are at least almost as good as Jeremy, right?
No, I would think, but I mean, it is an interesting question because I mean, clearly, based on Hammond's past, what he said, his statements, he's the genuine article, right? He was doing this for principled reasons, which is why he is considered by you and a lot of people a political prisoner, myself included. He
Yes.
was doing this for political, for principled reasons, is why he hacked Stratfor. And we haven't mentioned that. We went out, as you mentioned earlier, we went kind of backwards on this, but that's okay.
Yes.
But the interesting thing is, though, with his statement at the end there during sentencing, we did learn that the government did use him. A person who was genuine in his motivations initially was used by Sabu, which is, as you said, interchangeable with the FBI or the government, was used to hack the governments of foreign countries, the systems of foreign countries. And once they were, in a way, I suppose, done with him, he was someone that was disposable in the eyes of the state, right? Someone that they could use, someone who had conviction and was going to do it for his reasons. They used him and then disposed of him and sent him up the river, so to speak, for 10 years. And sadly, this is not a sort of a tried and true method that has been used, again, since the days of COINTELPRO, infiltrating activist groups, radicalizing, say, the Black Panthers, for example, using them for whatever purpose, and then disposing of them, and sometimes quite literally disposing of them by killing them. That was what COINTELPRO. That's the dark side of COINTELPRO that isn't talked about as much, because most people talk about it in the ways that it was infiltrated to discredit or to arrest or what have you. Part of it was actually to flat out murder people, which was crazy, but it happened. I've said this a ton of times, and I'll say it again. Google the name Fred Hampton. It'll open your eyes to what COINTELPRO was actually about. In fact, episode 1 of this podcast was all about that with my good friend Larry Pinckney, who was a former Black Panther himself, original Black Panther Party. Not the new one. Big difference. But anyway, going off on a tremendous tangent. Now, coming back to Hammond, though, can you tell us, I guess let's start at the beginning now, because I think this is an important case. So what exactly did Hammond do? What were, I suppose, what came out of his activism, were the things that we learned, and you touched on a couple of them earlier, the Occupy and the activists in India, and ultimately what he was charged with and all that stuff. So kind of give us a more complete picture of Jeremy Hammond.
Okay. Yes. Okay. So Jeremy's a really interesting case because when I went to meet him and I interviewed him when he was incarcerated a couple of months ago, I knew he had a background in activism, boots on the ground, because I had been to Chicago and I had spoken to, he's from Chicago. He's a very well-known, beloved activist from Chicago. And his brother, he has a twin brother that lives there, and Jeremy's very well known in the group that is referred to as Black Bloc. So Black Bloc actions, he participates in that. He's a very well known anarcho-communist. He has read a lot of books and he's very schooled in anarchism. But a new brand of anarchism, even though he's read all the books, he's not an ideologue. He really believes in the type of, I met a lot of anarchists like this in Chicago, which are just people that aren't going to wait around for the government to help them. They just help each other. It's people to people, neighborhood to neighborhood. And so they feel, the government fails people in a lot of ways. And it's really going back to traditional, people helping their neighbors and helping feed people and sharing childcare, and just this really humane and human-based philosophy of life. Um, but he also, in addition to that, uses black bloc tactics. In other words, he uses vandalism and destruction of property, etc., in ways to in different ways. It's just using a diversity of tactics in order to have. I mean, this man is a revolutionary. He has he knows what he believes in ideals, and he's nothing but an idealist. I mean, he really believes that the world can be a better place. And he has no illusions about bloodless revolution. He really feels that the world has gotten, well, that there's a lot of, suffering, but it's just disproportionately spread throughout the economic spectrum.
Right.
And that there's a lot of people already living in dire, hungry. That euphemism, food insecurity. I mean, isn't it just like a reality war?
Right.
What does that even mean? Like, a lot of people that go to bed hungry, and he's going to do everything within his power to change the system, so that kind of inhumanity and that kind of disparity doesn't exist. So I had met, I knew that, but going in, because of my movie, I was very prepared to see someone who would tell me that, hack, because, the movie's about, like, hackers are going to save the world. They're our last hope. So I was prepared to meet someone that was going to say, like, I asked him questions like, does activism really work in the technological age without the added threat of hacking? And he completely set me straight. Jeremy is an activist first. And he sees hacking or hacktivism as one more direct action tool. So no different from any direct action, no difference from a black bloc action. He sees it as just one more in the diversity of tactics to be utilized when you're trying to bring down a system.
Excellent.
So I was very taken aback, and then I got and he has a very captivating way of taking you in. And so I can really see how it might have been important to remove him, to target him, and to remove him from his stomping ground.
Yeah, very interesting. Indeed, that's happened, as we've just described, over and over and over again. They do target, by they I mean FBI and intelligence agencies, things like this. They do tend to target individuals who can, and I guess, rally the troops, so to speak, and do have that sort of way about them. In fact, not to go back to this too much, but that's something that Larry Pinkney shared with me specifically, that was actually in his FBI file, that they were going to go after him because he has I think it was something like a natural talent to unite, basically. And those are the kinds of people that they don't like. And I suppose Hammond fit that description.
Well, he fits the description, and also you mentioned the Black Panthers and Fred Hampton. The Chicago principles, the mantra of the Black Panthers, which basically the part I'm referring to, is that activists shouldn't criticize other activists in public, or air their dirty laundry and the dissensions within the inner workings of the group in public. One common enemy, and I mean, that is clearly not practiced in the movements and the social movements that we have today.
Sure, yeah.
Especially, and I'm thinking about online movements, and I'm thinking about the moral fags versus the lulz fags, and all of the permutations, all of the activists, including outing of the Black Bloc from the Occupy movement, etc. So it's really interesting because Jeremy, we didn't specifically talk about the Chicago principles, but every person that I asked him about, no matter where they were on the political spectrum, as long as they were against the system or wanting to reform the system, and he corrected me, I'm not a reformer, he said. So he stands by his idea of revolution. He will not take anything less than that. He doesn't believe the system can reform itself. But at the same time, anyone who's using any type of channels that is going to reform the system, he will not criticize. He lives by those principles. And I'm, having been immersed in this online activism world, I mean, this is COINTELPRO, but they don't see it. I mean, everyone is against everyone else. And it's, it takes on all sorts of permutations, but basically this movement is just beginning, but at the same time, is it even a movement when there's so much dissension and there's so much outing amongst the people?
Interesting. Yeah, this is classic divide and conquer tactics. If indeed this is what's going on, I mean that's pretty basic stuff. And it's unfortunate that realization has not reached more of these groups yet, and that they don't adopt that same sort of logic and rationale that. And again, I keep bringing up Larry, but that's something he has said to me so many times. Exactly what you just said. That we disagree in the closet. That's something I think he's always quoting Malcolm X. He said you disagree in the closet, but when you come out, you have a united front. And so that's something he's always said. So
which is what happened with WikiLeaks and Julian Assange.
Right.
This is a perfect example of. I've had conversations with people that are big hacktivists supporters and important supporters of Bradley Manning. And they've actually argued with me that Assange didn't introduce the leaking culture because Cryptome existed before Assange. Well, but nobody leaked to Cryptome. Bradley Manning didn't leak to Cryptome, right?
Yeah.
So, so it's a bit of a mess.
Yeah. Well, let's get into the stuff that Hammond. Right. What came out of the hacking, the hacktivism of Jeremy Hammond, the sort of revelations that came out of that Stratford hack?
Well, as you know, the Stratford hack revelations are on WikiLeaks as the global intelligence files. So Hammond. It was an epic hack by all accounts. So he leaked 5.2 million emails, something like 860,000 Strat4 subscriber clients, and 60,000 credit cards, unencrypted credit cards. So what was Strat4? Strat4 is this public, it's a private intelligence contractor that contracts with the government. So at the meta level, one of the important things is that there had been H.B. Gary before, but really with Strat4, we start hearing about in the media about these, what is a private intelligence contractor? And then when you dig a little deeper, you see that 70% of American intelligence is outsourced. It's a Tim Sherratt. That's his statistic. And what does that even mean? Well, that means that the CIA is this little quaint agency because they only do about 30% of intelligence. So this is a shadow CIA type of organization that has absolutely no congressional oversight, no oversight of any kind, and their allegiance is to their board of directors, which like any corporation, it's doing its job when it's maximizing profit. So what kind of things would private intelligence contractors do when they start gathering intelligence. Well, clearly it's more profitable to them when there's a lot of conflict and a lot of high stakes and a lot of danger. So how do we even know that anything they're presenting, that their intelligence is actually uh, uh, honest, if their profit motive is tantamount to everything else? I mean, to me, that's actually extremely important. Uh, Now, so he hacks into Stratfor, and he uploads to WikiLeaks. And who starts looking at the stuff? Well, actually, it didn't get a lot of play in the mainstream media.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but we've had certain journalists at certain places that are studying it, and slowly we're getting into like what exactly, and it's just a gold mine. I mean, it's not even the tip of the iceberg. But some of the things that came out is that Stratfor was the client list. So the client list reads like a who's who of
Right.
American corporations, basically the corporate state, the people that run things. So we've got Coca-Cola, we've got Bank of America,
Mm-hmm.
we've got Dow Chemical, um, and then the revelations. So they spied on Occupy. They tried to set up independent journalist Alexa O'Brien, try to link her to fundamental. Alexa O'Brien is a journalist that's become well known because she transcribed every day
The
Bradley
Bradley
Manning
Manning
trial.
trial. Right.
Right. So she's a very well-respected journalist. She's won a lot of awards. And the mainstream media that sat out the majority of the Bradley Manning proceedings would have no information unless she had been transcribing everything. So
By the way, real quick, just to inject this, because I believe I read that Alexa O'Brien is now auctioning off that transcript of the Manning trial, and all the proceeds are going to go towards Barrett Brown's defense. So I just wanted to throw that out there for people listening.
yes, this is a historic document. She's auctioning the pleadings.
Mm-hmm.
And I was looking at it. It's all handwritten. It's very, very precious, this document. It's very meaningful, and we'll see, who's the highest bidder
Right.
for that. Yeah, and so I would like to just focus on one revelation, because
Sure.
if we focus on them all, I think we'll lose
Yeah,
the.
we'll fill up way too much time and it's a
Okay.
lot, to absorb also for the listeners. So yeah, absolutely. Whatever you think is probably sort of the one that you think people should really be paying attention to right now.
Well, to me, one that I'd like to talk about right now
Mm-hmm.
is Dow Chemical is a client of Stratfor, and Dow Chemical has never taken responsibility for its subsidiary Union Carbide in something that's known as the Bhopal disaster,
Mm.
which is a chemical spill that killed initially 40,000 Indians in Bhopal, India. But even though they didn't take responsibility for that, they were spying on the Bhopal activists. Now, in addition to the 4,000 people, over 500,000 people, Indians in India, have been affected by that disaster. Union Carbide, Dow Chemical, has never cleaned that. They've never taken responsibility for it, and they've never cleaned it up. So the documents reveal that Dow Chemical, in the midst of this $100 million sponsorship of the Olympics in India, took an interest in the Bhopal disaster and the activists and what they were doing, because it might hurt their branding, right?
Mm-hmm.
So um, so we have 4,000 dead people that died overnight in this disaster, and 500,000 in the interim, since this disaster which happened in 1984 that have become severely ill. Never took responsibility, never paid a penny to the victims. But yet they spend hundreds of thousands of dollars gathering intelligence, gathering information on the victims.
Right.
On 25 years later, they're gathering information. In other words, like this cover-up. Stratford's helping them cover up what they've never taken responsibility for. Well, if they had no responsibility, why would they be spying and gathering intelligence on the activists that are trying to right a wrong? I mean, what a reversal of the way the world should work.
Yeah.
We should be protecting people that have come under, that are victims of disasters.
And I would add real quick, also protecting the individuals who uncover this information, like a Hammond, which is why this case is so important, and why, as you just said, everything is just on its head. We're living in a bizarro world where the guy who shared with the world this information that you're sharing with our audience right now, the guy who discovered it through his activism, is now going to jail for 10 years, and the big criminals, the Dow Chemical or Stratford themselves or whoever, these guys, or the government, whatever, these guys, what punishment do they receive? None, if any at all. Maybe a tiny fine that's a tiny percentage of their profits every year. It's just really, again, incredible that this is the world that we live in today, isn't it?
Yeah, well, the reason I'm talking about Bhopal is because someone 2 days ago posted on my Facebook page a picture of an Indian, right? She's clearly an Indian with a bindi between her forehead.
I saw this on your Twitter feed.
In a sari, holding a picture of Jeremy Hammond. In India, in Bhopal, Jeremy Hammond is a hero because he brought to light an injustice being done against people, victims of Union Carbide.
Indeed.
And in the United States, in Judge Preska's court in New York City, he's sentenced to 10 years. I mean, that is such a reality war on our minds.
Exactly. And what a powerful image that was of that young girl holding up a picture of Hammond saying, "Free Hammond." What a message that sends, because again, this is I know I can see now why the reality war was your name of choice in the beginning, because it really is that. It really is that war on perception, on reality, on our minds. Because how can this be? I have to say just quickly, as I know we're running short on time.
Yes.
It's a shame that I don't know if you saw this story about Ethan Couch, because if you go to any of your recent articles, Vivian, on Huffington Post, right next to it, I couldn't avoid looking at it just now, because under most popular is a story. And you might have seen it by now. It says, "Teen avoids prison because he's wealthy." The story of Ethan Couch. Have you seen this?
No, I haven't.
Oh my God! I was going to say, it's a shame that Jeremy Hammond or Barrett Brown weren't extremely wealthy, or they would have just gotten probation instead of 10 years or 105 years potentially. Because this I can't. It's just kind of a tangent, but it's not. It relates in this way that here is a young boy, 16 years old, who argued, his lawyer argued he had affluenza, meaning he's too rich to have a moral compass. So he was driving around drunk, killed 4 people. 4 people are no longer alive because of this young man's actions, and he gets probation. Whereas, again, I mean, juxtaposition that with Jeremy Hammond, who hacked into Stratford and got some emails. Barrett Brown, who put up a link to these emails, and they're potentially seeing a hard time versus a guy who killed 4 people and gets probation. This is the world we live in. It's just incredible. I'm sorry that I had to throw that in there. I just wanted to bring that up.
I think that's interesting because, see, this young man suffering from affluenza, he killed 4 people, and that does not in any way threaten the state, 4 dead people. But Aaron Swartz, who was also an affluent young man, he threatened the state with his
good point.
information activism.
Good point.
And he thought he was but Aaron never thought that was going to happen to him. Aaron thought that he was, friends with the, the Digerati and Lawrence Lessig.
Yeah.
And but he wasn't too big for the machine to devour.
Very
no
good.
one
Mm-hmm.
threaten the state. You have to pass the $1 billion mark. I guess, David Koch would never go to jail.
No, that's a really, really good point. I mean, yeah, this young kid whose parents are very, very wealthy, and which I found ironic that the legal defense was he's so rich that he thinks his actions don't have consequences, and so therefore his actions shouldn't have consequences. But good point though, that he's not a threat though, is he, to the state?
Yeah, I can totally see how that would work, because we could go down the line of the people responsible for these arguably illegal wars, and they've got Paruenza, right?
Right.
You don't see Dick Cheney or any of those guys going to jail either.
Exactly. No, they host banquets and have a good laugh at our expense and joke about how they're eating and enjoying fine dining instead of being at The Hague where they should be. Literally, that's what they were joking about. It's quite, again, it is freaking bizarro land. It's
so Guillermo, it's the hacker wars, because it's way too depressing to talk about how they're doing all
very
this
true.
stuff to us, right?
Very true.
The film is like a recruitment video, be the best that you can be, join the army. Well, okay, so you could just, labor in your minimum wage job that you can't even get anymore. Or you could join this movement and fight the good fight.
Indeed. Well, Vivian, I know you've got to run, so we're just about out of time. But if anything else you'd like to share with the audience real quick before you go, please do mention, for example, where people listening out there can learn more about the film, can follow your work, things like this, please.
Okay. Well, I guess that today I've been working all day on our presentation. Some of us are going, my film has a panel at the South by Southwest Festival, which is in March. And I'm super excited about it because that South by Southwest is in Austin, Texas.
Yeah, I'm just south of Austin. Maybe I'll see you there.
You should come, because the panel's about Barrett Brown and about Jeremy Hammond. And as you know, and maybe your listeners know, Barrett Brown is incarcerated in Texas, and there's a gag order. We're going to be talking up a storm about his case. And Stratfor is in Texas,
indeed,
too.
in Austin, Texas.
So that's going to be super fun, to bring The Mountain is Going to Mohammed. I guess the film, we're just, we have a website, but it's all going to be new with the new name.
Right.
Just, you can follow me on Twitter. And I just use @VivianWiseman, and we'll be in touch.
Excellent. Sounds good. No, I hope that we can keep in touch, and I do plan on I haven't been to South by Southwest since I lived in Austin 7 years ago, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, and it's changed a lot since then, but I do plan on going to this one. I did hear about that panel and a couple other ones that I found interesting, so I do plan on making it a point to at least attempt to make a visit out to Austin this time.
I'm sure. A bunch of
there. So again, follow Vivian Lesnick Wiseman @Vivian Wiseman on Twitter to find out more details about what is happening with this panel, with the film. The website for the film currently is therealitywars.com, but as Vivian just mentioned, that will be changing very soon with the new title and all that good stuff. So be sure and follow that for all the latest, and I'll be probably tweeting about it myself, so you guys know where to find me. Again, Vivian, been a pleasure to talk to you. Big thanks.
Thank you so much. You're going to have an amazing show. Thank you.
Thank you again. And thank you to the audience for listening. Thank you for subscribing to BFP and keeping this show and many other good shows on BFP alive. Very, very much appreciate that support. Come back and join us next week right here on Demanufacturing Consent. Until then, this has been your host, Guillermo Jimenez, reminding you, as always, that on this grand chessboard, it is we, the people, who are now in check. It's our move. Thank you all for listening.